first reaction when you saw that?
$500 fully subsidized with a plan? I said, that is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard, which makes it not a very good email machine. Now, it may sell very well or not. We have our strategy. We've got great Windows mobile devices in the market today. You can get a Motorola Q phone now for $99. It's a very capable machine. It'll do music. It'll do internet. It'll do email. It'll do instant messaging. So I kind of look at that and I say, well, I like our strategy. I like it a lot.
How do you compete with that, though? He sucked out a lot of the spotlight.
This didn't
in the
age
last
well.
few weeks because of what happened at Mac.
I like our strategy.
With the iPhone,
I like it.
But with the new
The interesting thing, so most people don't play the whole clip.
With the Zoom.
No.
Right now,
But this part,
take phones first. Right now, we're selling
just keeps digging.
millions and millions of phones a year. Apple is selling 0 phones a year. In 6 months, they'll have the most expensive phone by far ever in the marketplace. And let's see, what's the expression? Let's see how the competition.
Anyway,
Wow.
I thought we would just start with that because it's such a canonical video of,
It is. It is. Oh my gosh.
Talk about not aging well. But everyone knows that video, but most people only see the first part.
That's right.
Not the second.
Yeah.
And
they never include the part where he says, "Oh, it's probably going to sell very well," and you're right. They just show that first bit.
Also, it's interesting. They're talking about the Zune too. So we're transitioning here for those that are joining us for episode 6. So the last episode we had the Zune Kin thing with Jay Allard. This is episode 6. Welcome to the episode with Joe Belfiore and the launch of Windows Phone. So we are in that position. So this was Steve. It was like, this was kind of the mindset at Microsoft, to be honest with you. That was the mindset.
How could we lose?
It wasn't just Steve, right?
We're so awesome, yeah.
And it's the 5 phone's so expensive; it has no keyboard.
No keyboard, so it's a non-starter for business, for sure. And of course, we heard stuff about even internal, back and forth inside Apple about whether or not it should have a keyboard, because I know their own people were worried, or at least some fact, But it doesn't matter what you say in Apple. If Steve says, "No, we're doing it this way," you're going to get in line.
That's it. So it was like, I love that clip because it wasn't just Steve. I think some people were like, "Oh, Steve," like, no, that was pretty much like the whole Microsoft mindset at the time was like, yeah, we got our strategy. We're pretty happy with it.
Yeah.
And so it took a while, and we'll talk to Joe B today about how to shift that mindset internally. I mean, it took a pretty good crash and burn internally for finally people to be like, wow, we really need to reboot this thing. And then by the time they did it and then, actually shipped it, we're talking 2010 by the time they shipped it.
Right.
And I mean, that's what we're going to talk about today is that whole sort of rebirth, whatever.
Isn't it funny how though we'll think it's almost like internet time and dog years and like it's 2010, it's almost over, or where it's almost, the iPhone only launched, a couple of years before
I know.
that, Android. And so it's like in other markets, it'd be like, we're just in the first few innings, just getting started. But you're right. There was that feeling like, and everyone's telling us, well, you're late.
Way behind.
Way behind.
Yeah.
Way behind.
Actually, before we go much farther, I did find 2 other devices that I should have had for my last show I wanted to show you. So one was the little Zune. Remember this guy?
Yes.
And it has a little engraving on the back. You could do a custom engraving, personalized.
Right.
So go back to the Zune Kin stuff. So I found that. And then I found an original Toshiba Gigabit.
Ooh. Right. Because I'm sure a lot of people were scratching their head when you were telling them this Zune is basically a gigabit.
It is. So if you imagine this encased in brown plastic.
Yes.
That was the
There it is, folks.
Pretty much. I mean, they took the metal case off, but
sometimes when you need to get to market fast, you just.
But this was, back then. This played videos, and this was pretty cool.
Right. So, Toshiba was okay with it. And of course, as we probably said before, there's that Toshiba tie-in to the original iPod, right? Toshiba made those 1 gig drives that were tiny.
Yeah. So And then this says designed for Windows Mobile on the back, just to kind of, I'm not sure what that was all about, but
we
whatever.
don't. Yeah, marketing gone wild, branding.
Windows CE, Pocket PC, Windows Mobile, Zune, Kin. Now we get to Windows Phone, and so that's what this episode's about.
It's a game changer.
This is it. So
is.
Interestingly, the show's called Windows Phone WTF, and we're not even talking about Windows Phone until episode 6.
Who knew? Pretty late in the game.
What's that? Kevin Costner. He did those 4 movies, and the whole first movie out of the 4 was all just introducing characters.
Yes. Oh,
now apparently they won't even show the second one now because the first one did so poorly. So
I went and saw it. You're talking about the Horizon West. Yeah, I went and saw it. I had high hopes, and I was the only person in the theater for 3 hours.
Yikes.
And you're right. It was like, when's the movie going to get started here?
No. Movie number 3.
Movie number 3. People need to dive in. I think a lot of people were hoping for a little bit of Yellowstone.
A little bit. But anyway, we're not comparing ourselves to Kevin Costner.
No, we would never do that.
No.
We're just broadcasting live from our ranch in Aspen. So
that's right.
That's
right. Cool. So here we are, episode 6. I'm really excited about this one. I feel like we're on an upward trajectory for folks that have, seen 1 through 5 on YouTube.
They saw the prequels. They saw the prequels, and then we had the New Hope, and this is the New Hope.
Yeah, this is it. And it's a really good interview with Joe, and then we're also going to go to the museum, look at some gear. So maybe we should do that. Maybe we should do some gear.
Let's go see some gear.
Because this is going to be the original Windows phones.
Right.
They'll show off some of the first series, and that would be Windows Phone 7.
Windows Phone 7 series.
Windows Phone 7 series.
Speaking of marketing gone wild.
Professional edition.
Exactly.
Have that. All right. Well, why don't we do our museum thing, and then we'll cut back.
Sounds great.
Here we go. All right. Well, let's get back into it here. We are off to the museum again, still wearing our black garments.
Yeah.
As if it's the same day. But thank you, Ben and Matt. This episode 6, is the launch of Windows Phone, which was really kind of a seminal moment in Microsoft's history, right? I mean, it was there was a lot of energy behind it, and a lot of marketing and a lot of stuff. I remember the launch was at Mobile World Congress in February of 2010.
Correct.
A very big press conference, and a lot of hype, a lot of excitement going on there. So, and the devices themselves, I think Microsoft spent a lot of time working with some key partners to really create some iconic devices for the launch. So, what do we have in the archives here?
Well, let's talk a bit about the platform first. So I was at both those launches. I was out at MWC, February 2010, as you said. And at that point, they had a longer name for the platform. So they were calling it Windows Phone 7 Series, which I think Rob, you remembered that.
Well, that rolls off the tongue. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was maybe the problem, right? So when it
marketing genius there. Yeah. Yeah.
So then they had an event in New York City, which I went to, which was huge. It was a big show. And this was a very, very important moment for Microsoft. Obviously, the iPhone's around, getting huge momentum. Microsoft needed to think about what they were doing, and they had some big launch partners. So you had big manufacturers like Dell, LG, HTC, and Samsung. And of course, this was the introduction formally of that Metro UI, which you'll remember on the last episode, we talked a bit about how Media Center and then Zune had been influential in that design. So we saw the famous Metro UI with the live tiles appearing. And there's a few iconic devices. Now, I have to put my hand up here and make an apology, which is the most iconic device, I would argue, from Windows Phone 7 was the Dell Venue Pro. And at this point, I'll say Pete will work his magic and throw up something on the screen to show a picture of that device. We have a couple of those devices in the museum. You can find them at mobilephonemuseum.com and see the images there. That was a device which was a kind of quite a long device which slid up and had a QWERTY keyboard integrated into it. So Dell were very much playing to the enterprise crowd, playing to the BlackBerry story. It was a beautifully engineered device. I think it had like a carbon fiber back on it. It was nicely done.
Had the chrome on there, and also had this click. It had this kind of thunk when you slid it open, and it was almost like a Cadillac car door. Thunk, you know, that they
that's what everybody really wants, Pete, is that Cadillac car door sound.
That's who Dell was selling to, right? They were selling to, like, you know,
we're selling to old people in Florida. Yes,
the C-suite. We wanted that Cadillac door sound on their phone.
So the devices I've managed to get out of the museum collection, I've got a couple for you. So the first is the HTC Mozart's HTC 7 Mozart. So this was one of 3 devices that HTC had around this time. And this was important. You can see the headphones around the top. This packaging actually is unopened. Now, if this was an iPhone, it would be worth like, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars. This is probably worth next to nothing. But I've got a couple of examples.
After this show, you never know, you know.
Why don't you go ahead and just twist the knife?
We can retire then, please.
So here's the device itself. It had this interesting pattern on the back, you can see, and this is actually a prototype device. So this, I don't know how different it was, but hang on, let's get that into shot. But you can see it had this nice design anyway on the back with actually Windows Phone written across the back of it as well, which is quite a big branding statement.
Yeah, it is.
This had a Qualcomm chipset in it, which was pretty important, and it was available exclusively in the UK market. Via the carrier Orange, who had it for over a year, October 2010 to October 2011.
Wow. Yeah.
And it looked a lot like the other HTC devices that were available at the time. But it had importantly the 3 buttons that Microsoft mandated at the bottom of the device. So that was part of the UI that you had to have that as well.
Yeah, one of the things we had talked about with that we'll talk about with Joe in this episode too is this idea of a chassis spec.
Yeah.
Right. And so a lot of these phones, pretty much all of them, had to be pretty closely related to each other because the spec was pretty tight. It's like you're using this Qualcomm chip.
This chip or this one. Yeah.
And here's the buttons and here's the minimum dimensions. And so, earlier episodes, you remember we had the MPX and we had all kinds of crazy phones with fold out origami stuff. Yeah. All that's gone at this point. Oh, look at that. See, it's slippery. We're snapping into this, iPhone-esque, form factor. And Microsoft was extremely rigid in their chassis spec, where it was like, this is, you get to change your logo and a few CMFs and things like that.
I think the device makers didn't like that because it limited.
I was at Orange at the time. Well, I was at the beginnings of the E at the time, and it was very difficult because you effectively got a spec to choose from, then you chose your OS. Yeah. So we would have the same hardware being presented as if it was a Android or a Windows phone. And I think there was only two devices that were different. I think there was one with a different camera, and I can't remember what the other one was. There was a difference in the other one as well, but it was pretty much the same across the board. It was logical, but also from a ranging point of view, quite tricky.
Yeah. And in fact, we had some dual boot ideas back then too, right? Where
yes, I remember
Android
that.
or Windows Phone. Yeah.
Yeah. You talk about the mandating those keys on the bottom and deciding, one's going to be a home, one's back, one's always search, which is interesting because, a lot of people think about Android devices in the way they kind of mandated their kind of keys. It's very similar. With the exception
it needs to be, though, from a UI point of view, it kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Well, it certainly helps with app developers. That's something we heard about Windows Mobile early on. Apps developers were kind of tearing their hair out because screens were square or a rectangle, or the old phone, which was round, of course.
Of course. Big seller, too.
Yeah. I know.
So the other device I have from this generation, from the HTC, from the Windows Phone 7, was this device, which was another HTC device, similar kind of design language. This is the HTC 7 Pro, and for your US kind of viewers, this was known as the HTC Arrive on the Sprint network. They did a skew of it there, and it was it was what was called a business class smartphone, and was a successor to the HTC Touch Pro 2, which is one that I think we looked at in an earlier episode. This not only is just a phone, but again, the importance of the physical QWERTY keyboard here, again, so you can see that beautiful, I mean, amazing industrial design, opens out and then the screen pops up. Gorgeous piece of hardware. So this was something when HTC were just knocking it out of the park at this time. They were absolutely excelling, and this was a gorgeous product. I remember seeing this product and thinking, wow, that's a really nice premium top end product.
Absolutely. I think you could really bang out the emails.
Well, yeah, the business class phone, I mean, that was a really nice keyboard design. I think that was, now we're in a total, monolithic world of screen only, but that was probably state of the art in terms of keyboard design.
Yeah, it was just a gorgeous product. But it was interesting that you mentioned developers, because of course, and I'm sure this came up when you were talking, I think it was Joe is going to talk about this whole phase of life, which is where things started to go wrong, because this was ultimately a pretty disastrous release from Microsoft, because they decided, having done all this work on Windows Phone 7, that there was going to be this compatibility break between Windows Phone 7 and Windows Phone 8, which came in 2012. So the pain that people felt in this kind of discontinuity between Windows Phone 7 and Windows Phone 8, when apps just broke. You couldn't take them from one platform to the other. And I think, Matt, you remembered, I think they did a special release on this. To
7.8 or something to make it look similar. But there was also, it kind of, we'll get on to it, we talk about the Lumia story, which I think is next. But there was a loss of confidence with people who would go, well, does this one die? Will this one end its life as well? After we talked about Kin and all that, there was a bit of a lack of confidence from the consumer base.
Yeah. And moving from 6 to 7, I mean, that was a huge app break, right? We had, now arguably those were CE based apps. They were kind of funky, very business oriented apps. But I mean, as Rob can attest, when Windows Phone 7 came out, there was a hard pivot toward consumer. And I think a lot of the enterprise base from Microsoft was kind of like, what, WTF, to quote a phrase.
What? I mean, I should use that for this whole series. You'd had developers.
Was an exciting time. I mean, that launch in New York was enormous, and you had
that the one that had the giant Windows Phone with
like an inflatable building or something, or what was it?
I don't remember. I just remember it's an enormous set, and they had hundreds of people there, and they had all the partners there, and there was a huge showcase, and it really was just a big investment and statement of kind of intent by Microsoft, and it was amazing how going from that to see just the mess that Windows Phone 7 became, it was pretty shocking.
I think they had Kid Rock playing at that too, didn't they? I'm not sure. Or was that Silicon
one
Valley?
of them in New York? We had the Far East movement play in this giant tower that looked like a giant Windows Phone, and they were like 3 stories up playing. And
wow!
I don't know.
That was the thing I was remembering.
When launches were big,
back when launches were big, and
those days,
money was no object. It's like, sure, no problem. But you could see the seeds of destruction early on, breaking backwards compatibility with over a decade of Windows Mobile, decade and a half almost of WinForms style of .NET compact framework apps that people have been building, and then you're right that we switched to Silverlight, which was how we built apps for Windows Phone 7 and 7.5, and we had an executive at that time frame who said, "Oh, we're actually deprecating or getting rid of Silverlight in favor of HTML5," which it never helps when an executive tells the whole world or the media that we're going to kill this one thing that we're basing our new phone on.
Yeah,
lots of putting your foot in the mouth, or
tough.
Somewhat
self-inflicted wounds.
But I mean, I think to Matt's point, like there was just a lack of confidence from the developer community in the longevity of the platform. And then the other issue, of course, I mean, was, you had this iPhone taking off and Android taking off. And if you're a software company or writing apps in general, at best, Windows Phone was third place. And who has the time and resources to not only develop the app, but then keep it updated, for this base of
with the risk it might stop working in a year or 2 years time. You have to redo that.
So it was real hard sell, and we'll have a show on developers with the developer team. I think next or two episodes down the road. But tough tough road to hoe on for developer evangelism on Windows Phone 7. That was a job that you did not want to have at the time.
No. So it's a relatively short visit to the museum this time around, but I think that's really symptomatic of the Windows Phone 7 story. It was quite a short-lived iteration of the platform, which, as you say, maybe sowed some of the seeds of its misfortune in the future. But some beautiful devices from HTC. That Dell device was very nice. LG was still supporting in there as well, even Samsung. And getting the Koreans to back the platform, there was a huge amount of work done, from my understanding, from Microsoft to really incentivize them to do that, because they had their hands full with Android. Samsung even had their own platforms. They were hedging left, right, and center at that point.
Well, I think part of the strategy, if I remember correctly, was since Samsung was so into Android and Tizen, then let's go after LG and sign up LG for like some big stuff so they could, counter Samsung. But I think the fundamental issue of why, other than the developer platform, is this chassis thing. And we'll talk to Joe about this in this episode. It was sort of like an existential crisis, that Microsoft was having. And even in the videos we've shown previously by Steve and Bill, one of the things they asked Steve was, they said, "What are your biggest regrets?" Blah blah, and he's lists a bunch of things. He's like, "Well, we didn't build a phone. We didn't get into the phone hardware business, blah blah." And so I think it was Charlie Rose, right, Rob? I think it was interviewing him. And then Charlie Rose says, which is one of the greatest questions of all time, "Well, why not? Why didn't you?" And this point here with the chassis was like, you could tell some people were like, let's just build the damn hardware ourselves, like Zune. Because we can build hardware and we can ship it. And then there's other folks who are like, no, we're a platform company. We need to license and we need to do this. And so there was that tension that ultimately, in almost all of the interviews we're doing and the stories that people are telling, if there's one thing they could have done sooner, it would have gotten into the hardware business. Like Alan Kay says, if you're serious about software, you build hardware.
Make your own hardware. Yeah.
Make your own hardware. And that is maybe the biggest knob that could have been turned earlier.
Well, it's interesting you say this, because if you look at where Android's going now in terms of what the basic requirements are, as you just said earlier on, we've got it's becoming a lot more restricted in terms of what you can and can't do from a platform point of view. It's nowhere near as restrictive as that. But it must support all these things, because it can go too rogue. So you can understand the logic about why you want to put some control in there. But I think you're right. There's perhaps too much at the beginning to.
At that point, you might as well build it yourself. And Microsoft never took that leap. I mean, you could also argue on the Google Pixels, and that has been like 1% of the market too. So I guess that hasn't really worked out for them. But it would have given a twist to the story to get more into that. But that's probably why we're seeing these phones sort of like all look the same at this point, because it was all like, well, use this chip and this screen and these buttons, and you can do anything you want as long as it's exactly like this.
Right.
But there you go. That's the Windows Phone 7 story. It's been great to join you guys again, and we've got more exciting stuff coming up in the future.
Yes, and don't forget to visit mobilephonemuseum.com. You can see that Dell Venue Pro. I'm using my little ticker function here. But Ben and Matt, really appreciate it, and we'll see you on the other side.
Great. Look forward to it.
Thanks.
Bye, guys. Hey, and we made sure to check out mobilephonemuseum.com.
.com. Do not, whatever you do, don't go to mobilephonemuseum.org. Trust me. Don't go there. Don't go there.
Especially on a corporate device.
Oof. Not good.
Not good at all.
Cool. Yeah. So those were the kind of original Windows Phone devices. I remember this is like Barcelona Mobile World Congress, February 2010, when they announced Windows Phone. And we'll talk to Joe about the internal, because at the time the Kin had not launched yet.
Right.
I think the Kin launched in like May, May,
something like that.
So there was this kind of drag race going on with the Kin, which started before Windows Phone. Then the Windows Mobile team got rebooted with Terry and Joe and Henry, and they were trying to get Windows Phone out the door. And so they did this announcement, but there was a lot of internal machinations to get Windows Phone.
A lot of machinations.
Machinations.
Do you remember building? It was like a mini data center instead of seeing, 1U servers in there, there were Windows phones. I remember Terry Myerson or something.
Yes.
Showing
We
off.
had like a farm. We had a testing farm.
Yeah. I remember that being pretty impressive.
Yeah. Trays of phones.
Yeah.
Which is pretty cool.
That was cool. It's a great way to.
Back when Microsoft had testers, but that was different.
These days people were wishing there were more testers around.
CrowdStrike.
Let's bring back the testers, please.
Save some money.
Devs
can test their own code. What could go wrong?
What could go wrong? It works on my machine.
No, but they had some impressive. Yeah, I mean, Terry and Henry and Joe and the whole team there built a pretty impressive organization pretty quickly.
Yeah,
and rebooted the whole thing and the design. In fact, I want to show a video, one of the first Windows Phone commercials, which kind of gets to the essence of the value proposition they were trying to land. Because remember, at the time, iPhone was like huge mind share. A lot of Android phones were out there. This is like 2009, 2010. So what was the angle for Windows Phone? What was this third ecosystem? Right. And it was really about, they were pushing back on, the fact that there were all these apps. So take your weakness, which was apps, and turn into your strength.
Right.
And it was like, apps, who needs apps? But anyway, so let me show you this video. We can talk about it.
The smartphone. It's come a long way. What started out as a nice thing to have is now the most important device in our lives. But the industry has hit a wall. Each new phone is just a slightly better version than the one before it. Adding to it has become a sea of sameness and a focus on apps over the phone experience itself. Don't get us wrong, we love apps, but current smartphones make you use them one at a time, in and out, and on to the next app. Then the next, and the next, rarely working together. So, what do we do now? We start over with a different kind of phone that doesn't make you go in and out of apps, but lets you glance and go. A new experience that keeps your life in motion and lets you flow seamlessly through integrated hubs. Hubs that pull the stuff you want and bring it all to one place. This isn't the next chapter in the story of the smartphone. This is a new beginning. The new Windows Phone 7 series.
Holiday 2010.
Wow. I want one of those. That's going to change my life. You
go from this sterile room with one app at a time to, integrated freedom.
Exactly. I was looking for that kind of freedom, Wow. Game changer. I hate going in and out of apps. I want all my apps to somehow work together or be the same, or I don't even know what I'm saying.
Actually. Well, this is the if everyone remembers, the panorama idea are these hubs.
Yeah.
It's like there's this panoramic panel around people, and all like your Facebook info would surface there, and your Twitter info would surface, and all the app info would surface inside of these hubs. So Microsoft had built sort of a hub to, I wouldn't say disintermediate, but aggregate, app data and present it in a kind of a unified way, which is a great idea.
It was really an innovation.
It was super innovative. And we had done a lot of that in Kin too. So if you remember back at the last episode, integrating all these feeds together and sort of servicing it. The issue is the app developers hated it, because basically you were disintermediating their interface and their experience and just kind of scraping their data. And so it was reliant on a bunch of these APIs that, ultimately like Google and folks got smart and said, hey, we're just going to turn that off.
We know about sometimes chasing APIs as they update them and deprecate old ones, and the phone is talking to,
So the app developers were kind of like, ugh, I want my app. I want to monetize my app. This was the age of the apps. And and the Microsoft platform, even though it was very innovative and user-centric, kind of disintermediated the app experience. And kind of scraped the data and presented it.
Do you just remember the craze around apps then, mostly driven by the iPhone, even though we'd had apps forever? People quitting their jobs. They built some silly app and they became an overnight millionaire in the app store.
Yes.
quitting their jobs, and it was like a whole new world, you know?
I know. The apps were back.
Yeah, I wish we had that now so I could go build Flappy Bird and just keep pushing this and make your bird fly. They keep sending me money. I don't know what to do with all the money I'm making of this bird.
I saw a screenshot. We were talking, I think in this in the gear section, they were talking about the launch in Times Square of the giant Windows phone. And I was looking on the web, and they had a picture of the giant phone, and one of the tiles was Run P. Remember that app? Run P.
Yes. Yes.
Remember that app? It told you if you're, depending on what movie you were watching, when could you go to the bathroom.
Oh my God.
And that was one of the tiles on this giant phone in Times Square, which I thought was hilarious.
You know, I don't know if we talked about it some other when we're in these discussions, the internal thing we did at Microsoft, getting internal employees to build apps.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that was the thing. Like, please. Yeah.
I remember we had these leadership reviews, and Joe B was there, and we were again talking about apps, you know, same old.
Yeah.
And someone said, you know, because Starbucks wasn't writing an app for the platform, and someone said, can we just stop buying Starbucks coffee as a company, Microsoft, until they write an app? Like, don't we have any leverage with these guys? And
can we just
everyone's like, oh, that sounds like a good idea.
Cool new kitchens that we redid with the Starbucks machines and go back to the Farmers Brothers.
Seattle's best or something.
Because we're giving them
anyway, everyone was just trying to figure out any way. But you know, as I mentioned, it was, you know, being in third place was tough. And the fact that Microsoft, you know, this is where I think the engineering decisions, you know, in retrospect, really it was a huge business issue. And so kind of burning the bridges on app developers between 6 and 7, 7 and 8, whatever. Just, you know, over and over again, developers are like, I'm not betting on this thing.
No, you're right. Yeah.
Good sound engineering decisions, but just awful business decisions.
WinForms going all the way back to the Pocket PC, Silverlight with Windows Phone 7 and Mango, and then Universal Windows Platform, UWP apps when we did 8 and 8. And you're right. People lose patience.
Right. And, you know, I remember having these discussions architecturally, this is better and this is more scalable and performant, you know, okay. Yeah, sure. But, you know, business decision wise, really bad.
Sometimes you got to go with the thing that's not better, like VHS.
Good old VHS still works.
Exactly. It didn't matter that Betamax was better. One of them had it was everywhere.
Right. Well, they say, you know, winning inefficiently is better than losing efficiently.
So. Absolutely. There it is. You should trademark that.
There you go.
I love that.
Merch.
Exactly. Winning inefficiently is better than losing.
Yeah, that's right. That's
my mantra. Maximum efficiency.
Winning inefficiently.
We drove that plane right into the ground more efficiently.
Yeah. Hey, so maybe we should get to the Joe B.
I think
that's what everyone's here for. They're not here to listen to us talk.
They're not for us. No, they want to see Joe.
So the interesting thing too
I tried to do a Joe hairstyle today.
I could see that you're channeling your inner Joe.
Yeah, you know.
What's interesting about the Joe B interview, which you will see, and I think we've done a few kind of clips and reels, is that Joe always sounded good on stage, always looked good, had the hair, everything. When we interviewed him for this, and we hadn't talked to him in over a decade, he sounded good. He had the right microphone. His hair was good. The camera, I was like, man, this
killing me,
like,
Joe.
Still nailing it. Makes us look
totally
like a bunch of schlubs. We're schlubs.
Yeah, pretty much.
So without further ado, why don't we transition into the long-awaited Joe B interview?
Awesome.
Here we go. Hey, really want to welcome Joe Belfiore to our stage here, our virtual stage. Hey, Joe.
Hey, Rob and great to be here.
Yeah, fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been a while. It's been a while.
Nice.
Although we say that to all the guests that come on. It's been a while.
Depending on the guest, it's really been a while.
It's been a long time. Yeah. What was it? We had Peter Canuck on, and it was like, oh, it's been like 20 years or something.
When Peter Canuck said, it's been a quarter of a century since we started our mobile journey, I'm like, oh, God.
Yikes. Yeah. So it hasn't been that long with Joe. But anyway, great for you to join us. Yeah, I mean, why don't we kind of get started? I think a lot of folks who are watching this probably know who you are already, but it might be good to remind people you had a really long career at Microsoft, and even before Windows Phone. Maybe you can sort of tell us, like, kind of how did you get to the Windows Phone point in your career from where to there?
Sure. So I just left Microsoft actually this past summer after 33 years.
Wow.
Which blows my mind. Yeah. Leading up to Windows Phone, which would have been like 2009. That would have been, in fact, I probably hit my 20th year during Windows Phone.
Wow.
Yeah, I started in 1990. And actually, most of the work before Windows Phone was like Windows. So I was one of the leads on the shell team for Windows 95, putting the start menu and taskbar in. I worked on the early versions of Internet Explorer in the IE versus Netscape days. Windows XP was a release I was really proud of. But right before Windows Phone, the last two things I worked on, and it actually turns out like these were sort of related. I think I spent 5 or 6 years working on Windows Media Center, which maybe people are familiar with and maybe not. It was this idea that we could take PCs and turn them into entertainment devices. We built a PVR, and we were one of the first teams to build an experience into the Xbox console that was an entertainment experience. So you could have your Xbox hooked up to your TV, but the experience ran on your PC and was remoted to the Xbox. So in that way, Media Center could distribute music and video and photos to everybody. And actually, the team that built that UI, we had this vision of broadcast quality UI that was mostly about typography and animation. And that team built hardware accelerated sort of an animation framework. And later we moved that to Windows Phone, and that is where Metro sort of evolved from originally.
I see.
Wow.
And then right before Windows Phone, I was working on Zune, working on the PC software and the service, not the device. Sort of coming from Media Center and having spent time and energy on media experiences on the PC. That was the job I moved to from when I joined Windows Phone.
I see. Yeah, Windows Media Center, you just jogged a whole bunch of memories for me. I remember, I mean, like every good Microsoft employee having a setup of a Windows Media Center in my house. Actually, interesting. I don't know if you realize this, Joe, but I joined in 2005. One of my portfolio of things that Susan had me look after was Portable Media Center. And so I was actually at CES in 2006, where Bill demonstrated the Gigabit Portable Media Center. I was actually in the audience waiting to show him the demo, and I think your demo for HD DVD was like right before my demo.
I think I still have one of those laying around my house. They're very thick.
The HD DVD,
as you would like.
I remember that. And like Bill got like all agitated during your demo for whatever reason, and so I was kind of like freaking out, like, oh my god, like I've just done the company like 2 months ago, and I'm like talking to Bill Gates about this thing. But it was fine. He demoed it and whatever, so it was cool. But I remember that. But Media Center was a big thing.
So much love for Media Center from so many people. People still talk about it.
Actually, I had one in my house for a long time. In fact, because I had set it up in a whole bunch of different rooms, and I liked having a PC in the family room. And I think it was only maybe 3 years ago that I finally got rid of it, because the guide wasn't supported anymore, and you just couldn't get it was hard to keep the thing working. Like the extenders didn't work with Windows 10 or even Windows 8 on Windows 7. So it was very long in the tooth.
Getting a little,
my
brother still uses a TiVo for some reason. So
there you go.
But so you had this career, you're moving around, you did the Zune thing. So what was the Windows Phone? Did someone say, hey, we're going to get the band back together and like reboot?
Someone tapped you on the shoulder?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, what I remember was, the iPhone had launched in 2007. There was a lot of energy at Microsoft to figure out how are we going to respond. And a lot of product people, which I would call myself one of, looked at where we were at with Windows CE at the time. And it just felt way behind what the iPhone had been doing. And, obviously there's a lot about the structural approach that Apple took, this combination of first-party hardware, a really expensive device that they got subsidized by AT&T, they came up with a business model solution to this really, really expensive premium device. And so, our Windows CE approach was not well positioned against that. And a lot of product people were saying, we need a higher quality thing. We need a higher quality thing. And so Terry Myerson was the first person who sort of moved over to lead the new Windows Phone effort. And then he went around meeting with people to try to drag into it. And I was one of those people. And Terry had been a media center enthusiast. And he said, we want to get the people who worked on this media center UI. It's attractive and smooth, and we need that kind of experience for Windows Phone. Will you all come join us? And so that's when I joined. And my role was sort of leading product. And actually part of what happened was to bring a bunch of the folks who actually built that technology for Media Center, and we moved them to the Windows Phone team. This was a technology called Splash, and that's what drove the swoopy, really smooth, high frame rate animation on Windows Phone.
I see. Yeah. No, it's
so that's how I got there.
Yeah. No, I can imagine. And like, I think it was kind of a bit of one of many existential crises, I think, that Microsoft was facing at the time, because they had been in the mobile business for a decade, basically. And Apple was coming at them in this vector, and at the same time, Big Windows was having its own sort of crises, let's say, about iPad and, browser and stuff, Chrome browser over here and iPad over here. So there was a lot of, kind of big projects that people needed all hands on deck. So yeah, it was impressive that there was that kind of getting the band together on Windows Phone, because it really needed sort of all the help you could get to do. It's kind of unusual in a big company to sort of reboot a platform like that. I wouldn't say from scratch, but practically. So what was that all about? Like, how did you kind of think about the reboot?
That's a good way to say it. And it's funny because now you guys are getting me to think back to all these things that I learned and decisions that we faced when I first joined the team in the days that we were trying to, as you said, reinvent the platform. And like a few come to my mind. One is that I remember maybe in the first few weeks that I had joined the team, we were evaluating the state of the CE code base and software. And I learned that Microsoft we did not write or own or create a phone dialer. There literally is a phone product, but we don't have a team or software for a phone. And this is true. And the reason why, and this is an interesting example to bring up because it gives you a sense of what the philosophy around the Windows CE effort was. The reason why we didn't have a phone dialer is that the CE product was very much sort of a building block foundation for OEMs to build unique phone devices. And so the view of the team at the time, which I think was both about efficiency and putting their resources towards what they thought was most important, but also the split of work and product definition between Microsoft and phone vendors. We're not going to write a phone experience because that's up to the OEM.
I see.
And so there were many aspects of the Windows CE effort that were tricky for us to evolve because they came from a philosophy that the product is the OEM's product and that each individual Windows CE phone could be very different from other Windows CE phones. Our role as Microsoft is to provide technology building blocks to you, and you build the product and you
differentiate it.
Yeah. And this became, this was a huge, interesting strategic challenge because with iPhone coming out, and iPhone was sort of defined by its incredibly high level of quality and completeness. It was a capacitive touch screen, probably the only one at the time. Maybe
that's right.
Yeah. It had full functionality. Remember, it was an iPod, a web browser, and a phone all in one. And Apple had taken advantage of this complete end-to-end. We will build the whole thing ourselves. We'll test it for quality. We'll iterate on it. We'll make sure that the hardware is fast enough to support the needs of this very demanding software. And that end-to-end product definition and construction is what enabled them to get this really high level of quality. So we felt that we had to do the same thing. And so what happened as a result of that was we had to draft people from around Microsoft with a very wide range of expertise. We had to get an app platform which came from the Dev Tools team. It was Silverlight. We had to get a gaming platform and experience, what we drafted from the Xbox team. We had to get a productivity experience, so we got the Office team to do a bunch of stuff. And it really was pretty amazing the degree to which all these groups at Microsoft contributed to and participated in the development of Windows Phone.
Yeah.
And so that was one, actually, I think, really terrific thing about the product or the effort and made the product great. And another, you all probably will remember, I don't know if the people watching this would be familiar with this concept, it was the idea of chassis. So
yes,
you all remember there was this big discussion, are we going to allow really small screen sizes and hardware keyboards and all these things? And we kind of said, no, because in defining a product that does this depth and completeness, like the iPhone, but then also allowing a huge range of flexibility is an enormous amount of work.
Kind of a paradox, yeah. I mean,
right. So we kind of swung the pendulum from Windows CE, which was an incomplete but very flexible toolkit for OEMs to build devices, all the way over to we're going to define a Microsoft experience, and it has really hardcore hardware requirements, screen size, processor, memory, storage, the type of touchscreen, all of that. It was a really high bar. And because we were focused on really getting a great experience.
Right.
And so this was a big part of the evolution from CE to Windows Phone. And a lot of the reasons why it felt like such a kind of transformation.
Yeah. It's tough because it was like at the time, and Microsoft was very much in the OEM business. I mean, going back to CE, Windows Mobile and stuff. I mean, we in earlier episodes you talk about the Motorola MPX and all these iMate Jazz Jar and all these weird form factors.
Crazy. Yeah.
Every phone was different. I mean, it drove developers nuts because we had a square screen over here, and it was like, But then by the time the iPhone came along, and you could argue Android too, with the Droid and things like that, things started to kind of solidify into that form factor that we know today. But it was I think the strategic pivot, like you said, didn't have a dialer, which kind of made total sense if you were in Windows Mobile team. But going from like an OEM led model to more, it was almost like, used to be sort of the Android model, then moving to the iPhone model.
Right.
But I guess the trick is, but Microsoft wasn't building the hardware.
Exactly. And at this point in time, we're not focused on that at all. Around a little bit later than this, the Kin team does go a step farther, and they are all about, very specific hardware form factor design.
They built it. Yeah.
Right. And not a broad OEM ecosystem.
Although the Zune team built hardware.
Sorry?
The Zune team built hardware.
Yeah, that's true. Microsoft did have some first-party hardware, but we weren't yet all the way there. We were still in the OEM model. We were still charging money for the software. We still, and a big part of the expense of this that a lot of people, they think engineering, but a huge amount of the expense of this is the inventory cost, the cost of distribution of these hardware devices to stores. You got to put them all over the place, which means you got to build a lot of them. And then you got to pay money to market them, and you got to pay money. You spiff retail salespeople.
Yes.
So as soon as you cross the line into your hardware,
it's a very expensive.
You own a massive amount of.
Well, like the Surface team, I mean, when they went into the Surface business with Panos and stuff, right? I mean, that was you become a full-fledged PC OEM. Right. You've got all of the risk and costs of all that inventory, like you said, and it's a very expensive business, and it tends to be a lower margin business than software only.
Yeah, exactly.
But that was one of the things we had a couple of different discussions on. I mean, I guess in your opinion, and totally revisionist history, is like if we were actually in the phone hardware business at the time, would that have made life easier? Like, would have been more success of the platform if Microsoft just said, we're going to take the Zune team, we're going to stick a dialer on it and put a Qualcomm radio in it and call it a day?
I'll tell you, I had one experience that definitely still rings in my head today as I think about what we could have done differently that would have had a different outcome, which was I was in a meeting with one of our OEMs. I won't say which one. Okay. It was an Asian OEM who had built a lot of Windows CE devices, and I'm explaining our new Windows Phone strategy. I'm like, I've demoed. Here's this new software. We're proud of it. We think it looks great. you know, it's attractive and swoopy, and it has Zune music and Xbox games and Office apps, like, and it's got a new app platform. I'm excited. I think it's going to be great. And the response that I get is the senior folks at this company, they say to me, can I put my own home screen in there and make it mine instead of yours? And I say, no. Well, they were like, well, why not? I used to be able to do that. And my response is, well, because we see the iPhone as the primary competition for all of us together in this ecosystem. And we think we need one really high quality experience that we are going to invest a lot in. And we think that when we all do marketing and promotion, we want it to be recognizable. So when people hear Windows Phone, you know, they get a predictable experience. So no, I'm sorry, you don't have that flexibility. And then they went on to say, well, can I change the features in the phone app? Like, do I get the source code? I put a bunch of my own features in. I'm like, well, no, sorry. You know, we have this model where we want a predictable experience and we're going to invest a lot, make it really high quality. And they went down this path of kind of identifying all the inflexibilities in our model.
Right.
And, you know, their response was, Google has this new operating system that's open source that will let me do all those things. Theirs is free and yours costs money. Are you sure you're going to spend enough on marketing and this is going to be the thing that consumers are going to choose? Because basically I'm losing all my flexibility in this model. So it kind of articulates what the real dilemma is. And my sense looking back is you either need to go all the way, you know, like you go first party hardware, you spend a lot of money, you invest in marketing, you build a brand, you got to go incent retail salespeople.
Take the big risk.
It's very expensive. Or you'd be better off in a model that's more like Android. And, you know, Android did benefit from, this is also kind of interesting. I had a meeting with one of our Windows Phone OEMs. And after the fact, one of them, I think we were at dinner or something, when the senior people said, you know, we worry about the model that you folks at Microsoft are pitching, which is for pay software and no flexibility for us. It feels like Windows, and a lot of the Windows PC OEMs are not that healthy. And we have Google telling us, don't let Microsoft turn you into a Compaq. Go with us, Google, because we're free and flexible. And so, you know, a lot of it is who you get positioned against and who you're partnering with. And, you know, we didn't go so far in the early days as to be first party hardware, make the giant spend, build the brand, and go do the whole thing ourselves, nor did we offer the flexibility and free cost that Google did. If Google hadn't existed at the time, it might have worked. Google did exist.
That was a challenge. And it was, I wouldn't say the worst of both worlds, but you had sort of that challenge of, you know, and the other thing we you know, without going into the hardware business, you're not generating the kind of revenues that could then justify the marketing spend. You know, so it's a bit of a, you know, circular problem.
Absolutely.
And actually in the licensing business.
I assume you all find this, and hopefully folks watching this find this interesting. There's one other thing that's worth remembering, which is that there was one dynamic that came into play and it didn't go our way. So you got to remember, Apple has built the iPhone. They have an exclusive deal with AT&T. Anybody who wants to get this awesome new iPhone has to sign up with AT&T. So AT&T is growing their customer base, and people are leaving Verizon, which was the biggest mobile operator at the time. So Verizon needs an alternative. And they ended up going with Motorola and the Droid. And this was in part because Verizon was able to negotiate a deal where Verizon owned the brand Droid. That's not Google's brand.
Didn't they pay Lucasfilm? Didn't they pay Lucasfilm or something for the rights?
Actually, I think they did have to. I think there was. I don't really
money
know.
Was no object at that point.
But their whole thing was they needed a single brand device that they could carry over time and a position and message that would go great against the iPhone. And Motorola won that. And so once that was not us, then we were, you know, again at a big disadvantage because the mobile operator is going to spend immense money because the revenue from a recurring data and voice plan is immense money. So that really mattered, you know, as soon as they were off and running, we were.
Well, and you can, I mean, obviously things have turned out pretty well for Apple, so I can't really ding them. But, you know, if they had not gone exclusive with AT&T, and actually also enabled Verizon. I mean, you know, you could argue that the Android platform wouldn't even exist. I mean, that was kind of the thing that saved that platform, because before that, it was like there was an HTC device at T-Mobile. I mean, there was kind of just these funky little experiments. But once they hit it with Droid, with, you know, that Motorola, like you were saying, that really legitimized the platform for Google. And without that 2000, I think it was holiday 2009, they just blanketed the TV, you know, airwaves with Droid commercials.
Really sci-fi looking ads on TV.
Yeah, and that was it. Then they were off and running. There wouldn't have been an Android platform, perhaps, in some other multiverse. Currently, you know, Windows Phone is the #1 platform, and Android doesn't exist. You know,
I think Google owes a lot to Verizon and the marketing they did.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, of course, the next thing that happens is once they get the boost and they have fast growth and they're in the #2 position, then they get developer attention. And now they have network effects. And once they have network effects and developers are saying, well, I'm only going to write my app twice. You know, I'll write it obviously for the iPhone. I'll write it for the Droid, which becomes Android. Do I really want to write it for your third thing? I don't know. That's a lot of work. You're too small. That's a good point. So then they get effects.
And just to clarify too for listeners, so the nuance here, the detail is that Windows Mobile had a set of apps and developers and stuff going on, but you know, one of the hard decisions, maybe you can talk about that, moving forward, maybe burn the ships or whatever the metaphor is, you kind of left those apps back there, and we had to kind of court a whole new set of developers.
That's exactly right.
For Windows Phone.
Yeah, and a lot of that, I think there's a couple of aspects of this, if I'm remembering this correctly, and I might not have my facts totally right. Like, one is definitely a platform and capability angle. You know, as I described, we defined chassis, so there was a specific screen size that we required. We required a capacitive touch screen, and the apps that had been getting built for Windows CE or Windows Mobile in the pre-Windows Phone days, they weren't about that. They were more aimed at smaller screens. A lot of those devices had hardware keyboards. They weren't about pinch zoom. You know, there weren't a lot of games. There wasn't 3D acceleration. So we needed to define a technical and experience platform that was competitive with the iPhone. So we had all those things, and the WinCE platform didn't. So there, you kind of need a rewrite. You need different apps. But also, this is where I'm not sure I have my facts right. Certainly in the years before, Windows CE didn't have a store. And there's all these dynamics of having an app store where you not only have a catalog, which developers have to submit to, but you have to have support for a lot of payment instruments. You got to get users to put their credit card in, or you have to support mobile operator payment.
A lot of telco integration.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a whole big giant pile of work. That didn't ever exist on Windows CE, or at least not in its fullest form. That was part of what you needed to deliver to developers to offer the full experience of, you know, a great app catalog and an app store.
With a lot of our MVPs, we talked about the old days where you had to go to websites like Handango, and you to buy a cab file.
That's right.
And you're right, all those apps that were built
cable up your phone and install it.
It was basically WinForms kind of design looking stuff, and most of them for business, people scanning barcodes and stuff like that. A lot of
business apps. It was designed for the business market, so it didn't have a lot.
Yeah, that's true.
And on the platform end, we sort of got lucky because the developer tools division at Microsoft was trying to popularize this technology called Silverlight, and they had built it really for the web on PCs. The reason they built Silverlight was as a response to Adobe Flash. So you remember Adobe Flash? So that's why Silverlight came into existence. And when we looked around and said, we need something that has like a nice editor tool, you know, it's graphical for layout, it's good at animations. Well, Silverlight was all those things. And so the developer tool division was happy to have another client that would distribute the bits and a store and a call to action for developers. Because if developers invested in Silverlight apps for the phone, they'd be more likely to build Silverlight for the web as well.
Yeah, no, it's true. The other thing that was really interesting, I think, and we'll also kind of dig into this into the developer show, but the panorama UI, I mean, the philosophical concept, which is kind of hard to pull off today, was that, you know, apps would provide their data, or services would provide their data to the UI, like Facebook, and those things would surface within the UI. like in the People Card, I remember, and things
hubs.
like that.
Those are the hubs.
Yes.
People
hubs.
hub, the games hub, the communications hub. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it was like you didn't go run a Twitter app per se, but your tweets kind of showed up within the People Hub or
like that. The way I'd say it as, you know, a person who was deeply involved in that, it's not so much that you wouldn't run a Twitter app. It's more that you'd have one place to go where you could see all of the social media activity together. And then when you drill in on something, then you
launch the app.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So it sort of provides a middle layer of aggregation that just doesn't exist today.
It doesn't. That was super unique.
It was unique, and a lot of people liked it a lot.
Actually. Yeah. Absolutely. I think also a lot of these services kind of tightened up their API access too, and you know it was hard to sort of keep up with. I think there was something with YouTube or something with Google where they wouldn't allow access.
Yes,
right.
They just cut off the API, you know. And
I think part of the Metro design, the idea of going sideways, the pivot thing,
panorama,
that was so new. That you would go like that.
And the other thing that was cool, and there's a guy, Jeff Fong, was the design leader on all this.
Yeah,
and he came to Media Center and worked on Zune. And this Metro, there were a few aspects. I mentioned typography already and swoopy animations. But these panoramas, you know, you'd have a narrow phone screen, but the idea is there's this wide thing. There was this parallax as well. So there were like 3 different planes, you know, and the back plane moves at a different rate than the forward plane. Kind of like when Walt Disney was building a multiplanar animation camera for Snow White. Same kind of idea. And it gave a feeling of depth to these panoramas. And
I remember that. That was cool.
Not something I've seen people do.
Well, in the Metro, you know, just to dive into the Metro a little bit, I mean, you said it was very typographical. It was designed kind of inspired by a lot of like subway maps and a lot of that kind of 2-dimensional where back then it was very skewmorphic. People were trying to sort of recreate, you know, real world objects, which never really looked good.
We had a catchphrase. There was a series of sort of principles of what Metro was about. So beautiful typography was one, you know, smooth and swoopy animations was one. Another was authentically digital, which is this exact idea you're describing, as opposed to what Apple was doing on the iPhone. We're not going to try to make a thing that looks like a physical book. Why do that? We're digital. Right. It would be authentically digital. That's
a good point. I also seem to remember content over Chrome.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah. That was so cool.
No, it was a radically different look, I think, and I think it shocked people, which was great. But you know, we were just talking earlier about you know, there's designing the best product, this great product, and then there's these externalities of the business and the ecosystem. And sometimes there's these kind of gravitational forces beyond your control, right? That's like, no matter how awesome the typography looks, you know, if you got competitors giving stuff away for free and letting you do anything you want,
that's right.
Like, you know,
right. Oh my gosh.
So sometimes you find yourself in there. Hey, let me show you a little clip and then we can talk about it. How's that sound?
Okay, sure.
All right, here we go. Let's see. Let me do my little thing here. Okay. A little blast from the past.
Oh, yes.
This was a really cool.
I remember this.
Photography here.
That is awesome. Okay. For people who don't know what this is, if you don't mind, can I explain? This is the Windows Phone 7 celebration of finishing. And that team of people that you're seeing there was our core OS team. These are people who create the software at the lowest layer of the stack. The networking, the security, the file system. And they trained to do the Thriller dance.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
What we had on the Microsoft campus, it was a parade. And it's funny because the idea of the parade came up exactly because of this reason I described earlier, which was so many different groups at Microsoft got involved in building technology for Windows Phone. And we wanted them all to be a part of a celebration when it was done. So we said, we're going to have a parade.
I think you're on top of the monster truck there somewhere.
Yeah, that's right. We were all, the leadership team, actually you can see it right there. We were dressed up like clowns. I'm the bozo. Actually.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Right there. Okay.
So the idea was, hey, every group that has contributed and participated, make a float. Yeah. And so people did all kinds of interesting creative things. And the Thriller dance was the core OS team. I think the comms team had like a beach theme and like I think it was surfing or Hawaiian or something. I don't remember exactly, but it was a great way to get lots of groups at Microsoft involved.
Yeah. No, that was pretty
That's
wild.
awesome.
I think so. David Callahan actually reached out to me when we started this project, and he said that he and his wife, a current wife, actually helped organize the Thriller dance, and they weren't married at the time. They met like doing this project, and now they're married and have kids.
There you go.
That's awesome.
That is awesome. So they weren't Broadway trained dancers. This was really the core OS team.
No, they were engineers and product managers and designers, and actually there were probably no designers on the core OS team doing the Thriller dance.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
But the other kind of infamous part of the parade, was the iPhone funeral. I don't have any pictures of it, but you can find it out there.
Yeah.
So I mean, in everyone's enthusiasm, which is well-placed enthusiasm, there was a funeral procession for a kind of an iPhone.
Certainly that was optimistic thinking on the part of the CoreOS team in their celebratory zeal over finishing our first.
You're right.
Yeah, I think there was I think somewhere in there there's like it says like iPhone buries the competition.
Oh yeah, there's an RIP right there.
There you go. Rip. So,
oh my God.
Well, but that was, it ages better than Steve Ballmer's interview about the iPhone. That's for sure. We'll have to play that at some point too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know if and that was kind of an exciting and fun thing. Like we used to have a lot of those cool celebrations for launches. I know we had something big on the for all the Windows Phone launches. I think they had
I remember. I think it was Mango. What was code name for Windows Phone 7.5, where I dressed up as the Saturday Night Live character Mango.
Oh, Mango and Saturday Night Live.
And I think we had it was like a road rally contest or something. I don't remember.
Shopping cart, or you had
something. And teams built out these things, and then they raced.
Yeah,
it was a really fun organization.
That was cool. Mango was a good release.
Mango was a good release.
Right.
Yeah.
And then after Mango, 7.5 was Windows Phone 8.
Yep.
Right. So that was a big switch because that was we were using the same NT kernel as Windows.
Yep.
And there was kind of alignment in the kernel.
That's right. That's right. That's right. It was that was sort of the aligned with Windows 8 release, right?
Yeah.
The same name. The app platform changed. That was where I think it was WPF, if I remember right.
That's right.
And so this was where we had the first notion of universal apps. And of course, that was an important idea, a good theory, which is, hey, developers, maybe there's not enough volume in Windows Phone for you to decide to do the work of building an app, but you can now also ship your app on Windows, which is hundreds of millions of devices. And so that was in the Windows 8 release where the first sort of full App Store download from the App Store kind of experience on Windows existed. Unfortunately, Windows 8 was not successful.
I know. Yeah.
So that didn't really help. And then actually one other side effect of Windows Phone 8 that I always felt bad about, so maybe I'll apologize to everyone that this affected, was that going from Windows Phone 7 to Windows Phone 8, we didn't have an upgrade because the technology change was so big, and that felt awful. Because we had people who bought our devices. They were early enthusiasts. You were kind of a lone wolf person who didn't buy either an iPhone or an Android phone back then, and you bought ours, and then we didn't even have an upgrade. Oh,
yikes!
Oh yeah. Look back to your point of the Core OS people who were dancing. You had that whole long line of CE-based devices.
Yeah.
And I remember in Windows Mobile for developers, your app couldn't have more than 32 meg of memory, and then, which was crazy town.
Yeah.
And then Windows Phone 7 had something called CE7 under it, which kind of blew apart all those limitations, but it was still kind of CE. And then you're right, that back compat, because no doubt about it, we had these cool developer experiences. But then developers' feedback was you kept changing the developer experience every few years, and what do you expect us to do? Which was tough.
Yeah, And I think like you said, the app gap was real. I mean, I remember one of those kind of leadership things where we're talking about apps, and someone said, we buy a lot of Starbucks coffee, but we can't get a Starbucks app. Like, how can we, can't we just stop buying coffee and then they'll write the app? Like, it was that desperate at that time.
It's funny because what I remember in the earliest days of Windows Phone 7, the struggle was to get enough people at Microsoft working on building the basic software. So the first, 2-3 years, can we have a games experience? Can we have a great email client? Can we have a dialer? What are we going to do about SMS messaging? Like, all of this. So that was the first bit. But then once we were past that, it was, can we get the apps? And like, there were many specific apps that I remember with people on our team, worked as hard as they could with the companies, but there were also a bunch of cases where we wrote the app. I think you mentioned YouTube was an example. Mm-hmm. And I think this is in part Google as a competitor didn't want to invest in their competitor platform, which is understandable. But there was the YouTube API, which we used to build a YouTube app. We also built an Instagram app before Instagram made it available. And actually, I had a fun experience because I was the person who got to go to Facebook headquarters and meet with Kevin Systrom and say, hey, we wrote an app. Will you please ship it? And in the end, they did. They did.
Yeah, good.
That's cool.
But for a while, not having an Instagram app was just a terrible drawback.
Oh, yeah. No, you cut off huge populations of not having this app or that app, and people just couldn't, wrap their heads around that. Even back then, people were addicted to their phones, believe it or not, kids out there listening.
That's right.
It was incredible. And so, that was a tough one. And like one of those things outside of, the business's control where, you take dependencies on, the ecosystem or partners to do X, Y, and Z for the business to be successful. How do you motivate partners to do the right thing or do the thing you want them to do, frankly? Sometimes money works, but sometimes it's not money. It's just they don't have the resources. And like you said, do they want to really have 3 apps now they have to write and maintain?
Right. And a lot of the people who run these companies, or especially if they were the founder, there's an app that you built, it was a small team, and you recognize that if you put it on another platform, once those customers download, install it, now they're your customers and you feel obliged to support them for a long time. And so
that's right.
Yeah.
Well, even today, you see a lot of popular apps that start on the iPhone, and there aren't Android versions for a long time because they know that once they get onto another platform, they're kind of there for a long time.
Committed.
So I can imagine going to a third platform is like, yikes.
And then we tried to start innovating with hardware again. I feel like I remember a video of you with that awesome Nokia phone with a big camera on it.
Oh yeah. The Nokia partnership, it's later. Now we're well into, I think, Windows Phone 8 timeframe. That was a huge deal for us, and they were an amazing partner. They really were. Like, we had all the things that I described, having met these other OEMs. Understandably, they saw an alternative in Android that let them do the things they cared about. But Nokia wanted something that was distinctive. They wanted uniqueness, and I would like to think that we had some really talented, bright, innovative software designers. Nokia had that as well, and not just for software, but for hardware. And so when we began to partner, there really were a ton of really cool things that came out of that, like in terms of phone sizes, the colored polyethylene, the form factor. Those phones were beautiful.
Yeah, that was
I loved
very
them.
unique.
Beautiful.
They were super unique. And I thought our partnership was great. It's too bad that we never got critical mass on enough devices begetting enough apps to really achieve.
Well, and someone could argue, why didn't they partner earlier? But I mean, the part of it was Nokia had to come to that place themselves. Old burning platform memo.
Symbian.
Yeah, they had Symbian, they had investments, and they were, going to keep going until, they couldn't. And by the time I think they realized they couldn't, things were pretty late in the ecosystem cycle.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's funny though, when you think of the foresight though we had with them, with the camera, the giant, was it 40 megapixels, 42 something?
Yeah. Was that the 1020? I think
1020.
Yeah. But think about it today. The number one thing that drives phone choice today is the camera.
Yeah, quality of the camera. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the camera button, that was part of our chassis spec. We required a camera button because of the theory. Look, it's a high frequency use case scenario, and it's often the situation where somebody wants to pull the phone out of their pocket fast and take a picture. You don't want to navigate around like the moment is going to happen. So we required that, and now finally you see Apple adding a button like that to the iPhone. What was it, just last year?
Yeah, 2024.
That was also the first time I ever saw augmented reality. Do you remember we had that on the phone, and you could aim the camera around on a city street, and you'd see superimposed?
That's right.
Because people go, "Oh, I remember it took forever to get augmented." It's like, no, we had that forever ago. That was some pretty innovative. A lot of great work. Was so much great work done there.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff. Well, Joe, any kind of parting words of wisdom for people trying to do crazy things today with their products? And
I was just thinking, you're describing all the stuff that I haven't thought about in a long time. It makes me kind of sentimental for the innovative work. For people who are doing this today, I think if I were in similar situations, in a lot of cases, it feels like the window for the winning strategy is narrow and subtle, and so I kind of think in our case, we didn't have it quite right, and we didn't adjust fast enough, and we didn't acknowledge the drawbacks of the approach well enough to know, is this partner really going to invest, or is this partner going to choose the alternative instead of me? And so, you got to be totally realistic. You have to look at the data in a super unbiased way. You have to be willing to question your religion. We, especially at Microsoft, we had a lot of the positive spin is faith and belief in our ability to make smart technical and strategic decisions. The pejorative characterization of that would be arrogance in believing we know better. You got to detect that and ask the hard questions and make sure you're on a strategy that really does work. And, there was a lot of, one of the things that I tell people, if I meet with young engineers, or a lot of times I'll meet with engineering teams, I think engineers have a mindset, which is that the hardest part is building a great product. And my learning at Microsoft is building a great product is hard. Getting customers is even harder. And I think Windows Phone was a great product. It definitely wasn't a winning product. And, for all of the innovative work and, good design and trade-offs that we made about hardware support and finding a great partner like Nokia, not enough. It wasn't enough. And so I kind of think, make sure you have in the forefront of your mind, like, how are you going to get people to sign up?
Getting the customers. Yeah, no, it's good. It was definitely was a special time. And I think every time we have these conversations, it generates new memories of things that happened. And it was exciting. So, well, I really appreciate the time, Joe, and wish you the best of luck on your endeavors here. And I'm sure you've given folks a lot to think about and remember moving forward. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks for the walk down memory lane. This was fun.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us. This is a lot of fun, for sure.
All right. Thanks. Take care.
So long.
Bye-bye.
Well, here we are. Trip down memory lane.
That was a good trip. I like that.
Yeah. No, it was, getting customers, in the end of the day, you got to take all that internal innovation and work and kind of prove externally that someone's going to buy the thing. And I think
it's like one of the original things that you wanted to come out of doing this series beyond just the walk down memory lane was what's advice for new builders of companies and startups and things like that? What do they need to know? Because yes, it's hard to build that product, but it's really hard trying to sell that product. Oh my God, that's really hard.
And so baking in the dynamics of how you're going to sell it, what they call the go-to-market or GTM, into the engineering plan is really critical. So it's, you have to be aware of organizations that are completely engineering led, because you can't just build this awesome thing and then nobody buys it, right? Or for whatever reason, maybe it's a business model innovation, maybe it's a channel thing, maybe it's, it could be architectural, but if you don't bake that and kind of validate that kind of hypothesis before you build the whole thing. It'd be pretty risky.
I mean, I was just having this, kind of a discussion, mentoring a founder just the other day. And it was like a technical discussion about the product and what should we do here and what should we do there and all that kind of stuff. And then he was surprised, but then delighted later when I go, you really need to be spending 50% of your time doing marketing, though, and building your brand. And he's like, what? I was like, because here's the thing. You might build this amazing thing and it might just sit on a shelf over here and die because you don't have a great go-to-market strategy. And that drumbeat of marketing every day, every week.
Well, you got to prove out that hypothesis. I mean, kind of Joe talked about it.
Yeah.
In the context at that point, one of the advantages I think Microsoft had was that they knew Apple's playbook, they knew the Android playbook, and so therefore they had to come up with something to kind of beat those two things. So in that sense, they knew the competition well and the dynamics of the market. And in spite of that, like he was telling the story about how the OEMs were kind of rejecting the chassis strategy.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's something you would validate ahead of time before you built this thing. And then say, well, if all the OEMs are going to reject the chassis strategy or kind of half-ass it or do dual boot, Android, whatever, maybe then it's like, okay, well, let's just build our own stuff. Let's just go for it.
That was such a great part of the discussion. Going all in with your own stuff and then having the money to do the right marketing.
Yeah.
Or you've got this Android thing that's free and open source.
That's right. Got to pick one or the other. I feel like Windows Phone specifically. I mean, Windows Mobile kind of suffered from that a little bit too, but Windows Phone really was kind of I would say, right in the middle of that struggle.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Pick a lane.
Just when you think your only struggle is with Apple, and then Joe brings up the whole Droid thing with Verizon.
Yeah,
it's like, oh crap.
Yeah.
Thanks, Verizon.
Fighting a war on two fronts, is that what they call it? Well, you could argue three fronts because there was an internal front too. I mean, we talked a little bit about that, but we won't go into all the Steven Sinofsky stuff and everything happening back then. But there was a lot of internal challenges with iPad and Windows 8 and all that stuff. So internally, people were sort of circling the wagons on these big franchises like Windows.
Yeah,
and which was back then, it wasn't a big Azure business and all that other stuff. So Windows was the big part of the revenue. So there was a third war going on, not just Android and Apple, but there was an internal war with big Windows and apps and app platforms and stores and all kinds of stuff. And there just really wasn't a reconciliation there of any. It wasn't a strength. It was a weakness. It was a weakness, and it should have been a strength. And
best laid plans.
Best laid plans. Hey, let me throw up one more video here.
Oh, good.
Because one of the things, actually, when we started doing this series, back when we were talking about 1990s, late 90s, whatever, that was kind of pre-YouTube. So we didn't really have a lot of content. So now that we're into the 2010s,
right,
in this story, we have more content. So that there was a lot more kind of ads and other videos that were made for this era and this platform. So one of I would say arguably maybe the best one. There's another really good one we'll save for the Lumia episode, but this advertisement was, I thought, hilarious. It doesn't age perfectly well, but let me play it and then we'll take it from there. Okay.
We'll decide.
We'll decide.
Really? It's time for a phone.
Really? Really?
To save us from our phones. New Windows Phone, designed to get you in and out and back to life.
There you go.
Could we make that today?
Could be. Yeah, it's pretty prescient, I thought.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Good ad.
It was very good ad. It was very good ad.
And it played to the whole, hub thing we were talking about with Joe and how you can see things at a glance and live tiles, and all that stuff back then, which was trying to keep people from sticking their head in their phone, which who knew that was just the tip of the iceberg back then.
It really was. It was going to get a lot worse.
A lot worse.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, that's prescience. You know, today you hear people saying, please be present. Please be here in the moment with me, you know, but you're right. They're not. They're
the guy with the baseball glove and he gets in there.
That's awesome.
Classic.
Oh my God. Good stuff.
Right. Well, I thought this was a good episode. This was
absolutely. I loved it. I loved it.
And, and we're on to next one, episode 7, which I think is our developer episode. So we touch in with 7. Yes. Windows Phone WTF 7 series.
7 series, exactly. That might make it even funnier.
All right. Well, until next time.
All right. We will see you at the next episode. It's going to be good. Adios.